All right, so I've just started recording and I've opened up the webinar for the attendees. So we'll just give them about 20 to 30 seconds to enter and get settled in.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, I think we're all set.
Great, over to you, Max.
Welcome to Not Writing Access, Crip Poetics, a hybrid event. My name is Max Ferguson. My pronouns are he and they, and I'm a PhD student from York University, but I'm currently here visiting in the School of Disability Studies. My hair is brown with tinges of blonde. I am wearing glasses and a mask, so you can't see my beard, but I'm wearing a black shiny shirt, and yeah, and I'm white presenting. The land acknowledgement, I guess I can jump right into that. Toronto is the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process. Land acknowledgements as a practice must prompt us to think carefully about relations individually and collectively to the land, to Indigenous people, and to the processes of colonialism. I will turn it over to Eliza Chandler, who is a professor here in the School of Disability Studies for the Access Note.
Thanks, Max. It's Eliza speaking. I'm a white woman, noticeably disabled. I have short hair and I'm wearing a black mask with a black shirt on with a high neck. So just by way of access, both here in the room and online, we have a few points of access. So we have ASL interpreters that you can pin if you're on the Zoom call, and we can see them here. We have captioning. If you turn on the closed captioning button on your Zoom call, you'll see the captioning. For those of you at home or at work or wherever you are at the library, and those of us in here, we invite you all to engage with this talk if you feel comfortable, whether that's if you're at home, in your bed, on your couch, hopping in and out of the webinar, leaving and coming back into the room, moving about, or otherwise relaxing the space in the way that works for you. So please do take up space in whatever ways work for you. Turning to the presenters, there may be moments of perceived grammatical errors or disruptions, pauses, and distorted speaking. We can think about language in the context of ongoing colonialism, as Max has just opened us up to think about. And as well, in this talk, these moments of perceived disjunctures are important moments of access for MAD presenters. We will also be projecting some of the poems that will be read out today by our excellent presenters on the big screen here in the room, and it will be broadcasted over Zoom. If you're in this space, if you go out the door and sort of loop around, So take a left and then a left again. You'll eventually end up in an all gender accessible washroom. Sort of down the hall behind us. Hi there. And if you turn right, you'll end up at gendered single stall communal washrooms, but single stall in those washrooms. And a final note of access concerning documentation, the Zoom call is being recorded. And there may be photographs taken here in the room. If you would not like to be photographed, just let us know by raising a hand or telling us so, and we won't photograph you. I think those were all of my access notes. Are there anything to add to that list or any questions here in the room or on the Zoom call?
Liza,
Yeah,
I just want to add, if you go out that door to washroom, you can't get back in it because it locks. So you just have to come back all the way around and come in the front door.
thank you. That's important. So we'll keep our eye on the chat. I guess I'll just say one more note is that if you have words of enthusiasm and support, feel free to write them in the chat as the presenters, as the poets are presenting. When we get to the Q&A session, we'll ask you to use the Q&A function on Zoom, or you can email me, but we'll remind you of both of those things when we get to that. Okay, so just a few more notes before we begin. So finally, I'd like to welcome you here on behalf of the School of Disability Studies, on behalf of lots of my colleagues here, including Esther and Lauren at Yale Online. Tally is probably hosting us in some capacity. And Rob and Andrew, of course, are presenting, and all of you are in our midst. So the School of Disability Studies is providing internationally renowned teaching and learning in critical disability studies and lab studies for over 20 years. A part-time undergraduate degree completion program. We are privileged to engage with primarily working students whose lives intersect with disability, madness, and deathhood, directly and indirectly through the lived experience. Any of us would be happy to talk to you more specifically about disability studies here at TMU. And on that note, thank you to the School of Disability Studies as well as the Faculty of Community Services for sponsoring tonight's event. As some of you might know, here at TMU, we're engaged in a workers' strike. QP 233 representing custodians, groundskeepers, and maintenance staff workers remain on strike. The union began their strike action on Monday, April 17th, and it continues. Workers are fighting for fair wages and pension equity at TMU. By coming onto campus, it's an important act of solidarity to be noting when things are uncapped, when garbage cans are filling up, and reporting them to the university. And I have a screen up for those of us in the room for some information about how, but we can pass along that information in different ways. And reporting issues not only ensures that the health and safety of our members and of the community are protected, but it also sends a message to the university's administration about the critical role that QP 233 members play in maintaining our spaces on this campus. So thanks for being here and thinking consciously about that. So with that, I think that's all. So I'll turn it to you, Max, and shortly we'll share our screen so the presenters view will shrink a little bit.
Yay.
Yeah.
Well, it's up to you to introduce everyone. So I'm gonna start. I'm going to start with Rob Colgate, pronouns he, she, and they. And Rob is a Filipino-American poet from Evanston, Illinois. He holds a degree in psychology from Yale University and an MFA in poetry from the New Writers Project at UT Austin. A Pushcart nominee, his work appears or is forthcoming in Best New Poets, Prairie Schooner, Washington Square Review, Mazel and Edwa, among others. In 2022, he won the Andrew Julius Gutow Poetry Prize. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He serves as an assistant poetry editor at Foglifter Journal and is poet in residence at Tangled Art and Disability. Currently, he is a Fulbright Scholar in Poetry at Toronto Metropolitan University School of Disability Studies. So welcome, Rob. And then Andrew McEwan, their pronouns, is the author of the poetry collections Repeater, If Pressed, and Tours Variously, forthcoming from Talon Books in 2024. They have also published numerous literary chapbooks, including the recently published Recovering Loop. They work as an educator and researcher in Toronto Metropolitan University's School of Disability Studies, where they write on literary and cultural representations of madness and disability from a position of lived experience. And then myself, Max Ferguson, he, they pronouns. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, curator, and scholar. And I'm currently completing my PhD in women's gender and sexuality studies at York University. My research focuses on anti-colonial approaches to transness and disability, medicalization, madness, neoliberalism, and necropolitics. I've been a practicing artist since 1996. Max, previously known as Sarah, because some of my work was done under that name, received my BFA from the University of Regina in 2001 and graduated with an MFA in interdisciplinary studies in 2017. My artistic explorations involve atypical and trans queer sexualities, activism, the body, surrealism, anti-colonial approaches to art making, and psychoanalysis. I work with media, ready-mades, paint stick, graphite, and digital collage, and I blend high and low art approaches, art and academic theory, pop culture, and other influences. Right now, I work in photography, sculpture, installation, performance, and psychoanalysis, the body, activism, queer, trans theory, madness, and neurodivergent points of view. I'm also a published poet and writer. I hold a degree in journalism, and I've worked as a political, legal, military, and arts reporter. So with that, getting all of that out of the way, it was a mouthful. I'd like to turn it over to Rob and Andrew so they can read their poetry. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Great, yeah, so we can just share my slides while that's happening. I'll do a quick visual description. You can see me from the shoulders up. I'm wearing an olive button-down shirt. I have brown skin. I'm male presenting Filipino American. I have hair that is pink on the top and black on the sides. I'm wearing a black KN95. And you can't see me smiling, but you can see some excitement in my eyes as I get to share some work with folks. So if you can see the slides, I'll start with a poem just to bring that into the space, then talk a bit about my project, and then read some more poems. So we can jump to the next slide. Vase, circa 1997. Pack light, you said, meaning to take little with me, to leave you behind. Okay, I said, I will. I will pack all of the light I can into this body until the glow spills out. And you can move to the next slide. So a quick overview of my current project and my poetics. I'm coming to TMU on a Fulbright scholarship in poetry, and right now I'm really concerned with access intimacy. Access intimacy is a term coined by disability justice advocate Mia Mingus, describing that sort of warm, good feeling that you get when your specific access needs are met. And right now I'm interested in access intimacy potentially as perhaps a more meaningful mode of care and love and intimacy. Yeah, we're going.
They're having trouble seeing your slides.
Oh,
so I'm
okay.
just gonna-
No worries. We'll give it a minute.
Yes, on our end, we just see the presenter view right now. We don't see the full screen version.
Let's try it again. Is that working?
We still just see the slide version. I think if you just stop sharing for a second and then you'll be able
Should you
to
be
click
sharing
the
it
full
too?
screen
Is it
version.
still-
Yep, we got it now. That's perfect.
Great. One of the most classic Crip experiences, sitting through technical difficulties. It's a moment of warmth, right? It's a little moment of pause we wouldn't get if we weren't trying to make things accessible. I kind of love that. Okay, I guess I'll restart. I'll read this poem and then talk a bit. Or I guess people have heard me. Let's move forward. I think that sounds good. So we can move forward one slide. Great. So he was talking about access intimacy as potentially a mode of intimacy that can be more meaningful or more important than romantic intimacy, or perhaps more essentially, access intimacy as an essential part of romantic intimacy for disabled people. So that's what I'm sort of concerned with in my writing. In terms of access, then I think right now in disability poetics, there's a lot of gorgeous poetry about disability and the disability experience and creating access. But I'm interested in moving from beyond a content level into something more experiential, rather than just writing about access, actually creating moments of access intimacy, of needs being met by the poem. And the way I'm experimenting with this right now is drawing on my work as poet in residence at Tangled Art Plus Disability and looking at visual arts accessibility. In a fully accessible gallery, there's sort of a whole host of things that might be present to make that gallery accessible. And I'm interested in using the figurative to translate those things into poems so that a poem might meet someone's access needs as easily as a bench or as easily as a sensory room to step away to. So the poems I'm working on right now sort of metaphorically exist in an accessible art gallery. So yeah, I'll share a few poems from the project. The project is called Hardly Creatures. Stop saying we are social creatures. We are hardly creatures the way we love like this. Sensory room. Feel free to flip back here whenever you need. Stay as long as you want. The light stays dim and warm. I promise there is a light. Portrait, hanging myself. One original work, please do not touch. The gallery is full of ghosts. They assume there is no art for me. Why would there be? Anything made for me I have had to request. I know he didn't actually want to hold my hand. This is how things go. You put the break in the broken place, the sick in the sickened place. Like this, the paintings hang in their stupors. Sick docents wander between the projected rooms, embarrassed of their standard tours. I hang around, sifting the images like sand, looking for a shard of glass in which I might see myself reflected. There is nothing to believe here until I belong here. Somebody, please transcribe my body for the masses. create a tactile replica of it like the boy did, so he could keep only what he wanted. Hang that form beneath the original so that anyone could pretend it belongs to them, so that the aesthetes can do what they must with their affected hands, can touch as the language and trappings of finery dictate. I am bound to being the art that I want to see. Each sculpture will soon be hooked up to oxygen, every portrait properly deranged in the eyes. The loudspeaker crackles across me and my friends' crackling bodies. Please make your way to the gallery for an on-time departure. Please place your dead into overfilled frame. To tactile replica, feel free to touch this version of the art. Me, 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 my hands, the sick, the stupors, my body beneath the original. Touch, please, please. Diptych, to live like this. Theory, I am not happy to be alive, although I enjoy the taste of chocolate and when I can remember most of my dreams. Praxis, I am happy to be alive, although people avoid me on the streets and I can't live without the medicine. Didactic panel, a case for self-harm, which I cannot write, though I do want to. It does feel good to break. It does feel better to be broken, for one's outsides to match their insides. The urge to kill oneself never truly going away, instead just metabolizing into the body, subsumed into instinct. Therein lies a taut justification that presses from beneath the skin, an underlying proclivity that twitches like a muscle, a mumbled fear that I pick at like a scab, that the tendency to respond to stimuli like this was inborn, as in, the dog gnaws off its injured leg, the bee delivers its singular sting. The porcupine never stops pricking itself, just stays slicked with fatty antibiotic. The owl swallows bone and feather in order to eat, reliant on its own vomiting, while the panda simply cannot digest bamboo. And the blue whale beaches itself when it knows its time has come. And now we take off to the museum, stare up at its suspended and incomplete skeleton. And maybe this moment of awe, this afternoon in which you have dragged me out of bed, will be the argument against those hushed and innate fixed patterns of behavior. We do not owe health or safety to the world, but we do, or at least I do, to you, my love. And I'm sorry, there is no conclusion here. And I see my wounded friends, or I don't, but I love them, and I do. And all these rhythms soon will change. The split arm no longer splitting towards the truth, the blood quieter than we remember, the grown salmon swimming back into fresh water to spawn. I need a minute. Slow down. No poem on this page. Sound sculpture. Voicemail. 1. Voicemail. Hey love, just calling to see how you're doing. The hill wasn't so steep today. The mountains forgot their fire. The soup reminded me of you. Is there any memory I can lift for you onto the bed of today? I miss you like the second long gap before the song loops. I know I always say this, but I beheld a strange bird. You know what it made me think of. If you could see me, you'd see me nodding knowingly. You'd see the sunlight through the leaves and tell me the obscure word for it, which I'd forget, my gaze turning ever upwards, thinking I'd see the sky as your face disappears from view. But no, it's to your face, and the bird passes again. And now I understand the point of wings. 2. Cart transcription. Sway dove, just culling the seeds, ours doing. The hell wasn't so deep today. The mouthings for God, they're fine. This super mind of me, of you. Does the air need memory? I can't left for you. Onto the bet of the day. I miss you like the seconds. Long gasp before the sun loose. I know. Always say this. To be held's a strange birth. You know what? It made me. Think of if you could seen. You'd seen. Nodding, knowing, leave. He'd be the sun, a light through the leaving end. Tilt me. The off cure, we're for it. Wit, I'd forget my days, tearing every other. Things I'd see. The sky, azure face, this pure front view. But no. Instill your phase and the bad pass is a gain. And now. I'm under, stand in the joint of things. Curation. I have trouble leaving my apartment. Outside, the sky fumbles with all of these unshruggable times. They drip down the glass of my balcony. I try to get out of bed without letting my features spill off the side of my face, but they spill, collect in tired pools of inconsequence. This small room. It is cluttered with bits of myself that I promise I will pick up tomorrow. For now, I strap myself to my tasks, record myself talking to the camera, tracking the minute fissures that have split across my body over the weeks. I live like this in my silly purgatory, crawling over the neutral plane of days. I am scared of them. They are the sole container of everything I love. When the days won't make eye contact with me, I stare at myself in the dead screen of my phone, the dry skin and cracked eyes of a young cartographer, convincing himself that one day someone will need these maps. Bench, playing along. Thank you for letting me die tragically. I know you know how much it means to me. Can you grab me a Sprite Zero on your way home? Also, listen, everyone who knows you is grateful you exist, and it's specifically about you and the exact way that you are. I'll be alive in the morning for you. Now please hurry home. I want to be me before I sleep. Thank you so much.
Can we just pause for a second
Sure.
and have a quick access check-in? How's the access going in here on Zoom? Lots of love for Rob and the chat.
We want to say that we have food down here if you guys would like. We can have fancy pizzas, t-shirts, refreshments, or
Maybe like after Andrew, before
yeah.
the discussion, we do a food break. I didn't want to hear Andrew's poetry.
With pizza waiting. It's a lot of pressure.
Andrew, would you like to scroll yourself?
Sure, if that's the easiest way to go about it.
It's whatever works for you. Give me a minute.
I'm fine if you're okay, just kind of tracking it slowly down.
Sure. we're
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, thank you all
for being here, both in person and online. I really appreciate it. And for everyone involved, Max, Liza, and Rob for organizing this. I'm really happy to be involved and to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to be reading from a recently published chapbook, so kind of a poetry pamphlet, which is kind of a slim volume that has ripped pages progressively spelling the word recoveringly. And that's the title of the piece. I started writing it and this ongoing project that it's part of a while ago. It's an ongoing series that I kind of think of as a single poem with poetic essays that follow it. All of the thinking around madness and its effect in my life for 4 years after about 2017 of making writing something that was almost impossible for me to do and unable to do. So during that time, after crisis and hospitalization and the difficult work of kind of recovering a sense of self after that, there was only one poem that I wrote, and I just kind of kept coming back to it anytime I felt like writing, and would just kind of go over it again and make minor edits or rewrite it in some way, add to it, take things away. But it was the only thing to go back to for these years. And it was kind of the place I returned to and went over again and again. So it will become this kind of object of repetitive focus. So thinking about that time and that poem and what to do with that poem, I decided to kind of make that inability to focus, that inability to write, the very focus of my writing and the very focus of my study. So I think of it kind of in a related work as not writing in some way, as kind of this inability to write, but writing around writing, thinking about the language that I'm still using in daily life and making notes and medical notes and journal entries and stuff, things like that, that circulate my writing but never actually became poetry. And so I was thinking about this as like a way of thinking about poetry and the difficult work of moving forward in some sense. Though, of course, I'd want to trouble the notion of like a progressive forward and what that means. But to give myself this space to consider this return that I had for these years to just this single poem. So in this chapbook, I start with that poem, and then there's kind of a poetic essay coming after it that sort of reflects on that time, draws some of the language out from journal entries on medical appointments or just reflections on that time, and draws that into what I think of as kind of a poetic essay. So I'm going to read from that, and it's on the screen now if you want to read along, although I know the web page has quite small font, but
We just class.
Oh, sure.
Can you all see it online?
It's a little small if it's possible to zoom in a little bit.
Sorry, can you see the room? Like the video?
No, we just see the page right now.
Okay, let's pause. I think the owl is not working, and that'll give us time to put your link in the chat.
okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I help with? I don't know what is that.
Yeah. That would be good.
Let's see if I can figure out what is happening. I'm just honestly just unplugging it and plugging it back in. It's the same.
Oh. Yeah.
Can you guys see us online now?
Yes,
In
we
the
can
room.
see all three of you.
Okay, great.
So we're just gonna pause to put Drew's link in the chat.
Okay,
Um,
sorry.
so we can figure it out.
Where was it? Don't know why that happened. What is the link again?
Oh, it was on the screen there, but it,
It's the-
if you Google it, if you type in recoveringly, like the word recovering, with LY, and McEwan, you should MCEWAN. You should see it.
Thank you, sorry.
It should be the,
Here we go. You put that in the chat.
it might be actually one link away from this. This is the,
Oh, okay.
it'll be on this page though. If you scroll down a little bit. Read the poem is just above the add to cart.
Oh, read the poem. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And somebody dropped the link, so that's.
Oh,
good.
perfect.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm just gonna increase the size of the,
Sure, that's better.
is that big enough, Luke, and everyone online, or I can make it bigger too?
Maybe a little bit bigger would be great. That's perfect, thank you.
Okay, and then we'll just.
All right, am I good to go?
Good to go.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just read from this project. Oh, and I forgot to do a visual description before, but I have shoulder length, dark brown hair. I'm wearing a black mask, and a denim jacket, and my skin is white. Okay, recoveringly. A remission of sorts without a source, or else a glance, a critical eye, notated and dated. Begun again in a burnout's burnout. A double negative. I feel so double negatively. Never use adverbs, never bog the writing down. Stuck recoveringly in breakdown's breakdown. Passed off, discharged, referred to as a former, a past patient. Waiting rooms of waiting for room to breathe. Code white alarm clocks. Keep calm, keep head down. Have some restraint, don't let it show. Hold back and hold out. Tap the edges of the table. It's a form of coping. It's a form one long weekend. It's beginning to feel a lot like not feeling. This discourse of sock-footed stability. Holding patterns for holding out a little longer. A weak link to the next weak link. It's a trial and error game of dosage, a half-life hide and seek. A symptom or an imperfect system. Here's another simplified metaphor. 3 to 6 weeks to take action. Today I did nothing, stayed in bed, stayed in the benzo haze of I've been here before. Recovering a sense without a sense of recovery. Locked down in without eye contact. How many theories of grammar describe how one cannot speak for oneself? An unstable script, a bad connection. A risk assessment reassurance on the hotline. Just checking in, just a phone call away, just a safety plan, just a wellness check, an escape plan, an inventory of updated charts, authority in an unstable script, edit again. Remember, bad writing is not your friend. You've alienated all your friends. So diagnostic and attitude, so imprecise a correlation, a rehearsal of a central theme, like doctor's note descriptions of a repeat customer. A symptom, a compulsion, an aesthetic reclamation, or an abandonment of the internal logic of the future tense. It's all in the delivery. Monotone belies a cold affect. We who go home, who learn to pass, who pass away in poses of performed repose. We who get better at getting better, getting outdoor privileges, getting a coffee to get through. A breakdown of the proof convincingly, recovering, surviving recoveringly. And now I'll read from so that was the poem itself that I was referring to. And the next piece is this, what I think of as kind of a poetic essay, all in 8 lines per page as it's printed, called Coda Recovery Journal. I have not recovered yet. No, just the same home again. They give me a plastic bag for my possessions, clear so everything's visible. I sit outside the glass window of the nurse's office, a way to say the world is all too wide for me. The poem cycles again like the routines of counting and uncounting multiples of 8. Checking in on a Friday evening, there are no doctors here until Monday. Touching the door 8 sets of 8 times, filling the glass and pouring it out again and again. Like just checking in. Institution green, institution blue, under institution lighting. The medical model of mental illness marks health and normal functions as a goal, recovery, the process of a healing of pathology. Like the way nothing stays checked. The border of a body must be breached to allow some room to breathe. A switch that never feels off. You're medication resistant, so we have to try EC2. A repetition until it feels right, but you know it never will. Since my hospitalization and Form 1 detainment in October 2017, I've only written one poem. Obsessions and compulsions begin to sound like rhymes. 8 feels right. 2 quatrains of a repeated line. Stop resisting. Call this an obsessive compulsive ulipo. Inventories of imaginary rooms scribbled on receipts begin to spill off the counter. Check the stove again, tap it despite a loss of faith in the memory of fingertips. Stop repeating. I keep coming back to the same poem when I try to write again. I keep rehearsing the same tired lines. Move along now. The Form 1 keeps me here for at least 72 hours. Sometimes I become so involved with counting something that I forget about it entirely. The object lost in the abstraction of an attempted numerical surety. I've cut myself, bandaged myself. I've written recoveringly, written unrecoveringly. Chronic cases disrupt a linear narration. This is just to say, I found a new way to write, a new language with which to describe a passionate unfolding. Symptom and side effect blur in the involuntary of muscles, the causeless of confusion, the chronic of brain zaps. This is anxious attachment. You're scared. You cannot be alone. Have you written anything lately? Am I allowed to leave? Stop resisting the poem. I've waited underwater for 34 years. That's something, to say this much and no more, become lost in measuring the borderline. Heavy sighs while pacing the perimeter. If I had to rationalize this, I would say that it's the last poem I remember writing that I liked. Chemical tolerance and chemical dependence begin to blur. But really, it's the last poem I wrote at all. The doctor describes how at this bridge we break. I keep checking in to see if I can borrow the momentum of a past long stilled body. I hold some compulsions close, their gravity too much for any conversation to bear. Stop repeating the poem. Although I voluntarily admitted I cannot leave now. In DBT, people are taught 2 seemingly opposite strategies. Acceptance, i.e., that their experiences and behaviors are valid, and change, i.e., that they have to make positive changes to manage emotions and move forward. He describes in detail how the force of the fall dislocates the organs and sends force into the softest parts. Counting, like writing, is the organization of ideas into forgettable units. And Eliza, I'm just going to skip to the last section. Oh, yeah, that was just there. Thanks. Intrusive thought or poetic image, a sense of control, a symptom of recovery, tethered against a future uncertainty I cannot bear. Stop resisting, stop repeating, stop resisting the repetition of the poem. I rewrite it recoveringly. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for your poetry. Do people want pizza? Was it their promise?
Yeah, maybe people online can take a couple minutes to stretch and grab some water, use the bathroom, and then we'll check back in for some discussion.
It sounds good.
Sounds good.
Cool. Those are great. Thank you.
That was really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, this is gorgeous.
Okay, we're gonna get started again. Max, I wonder actually if you should sit here. There's a bit of audio issues, people want you to be close to the owl.
Oh, okay, so that I can ask my questions and,
Yeah. I mean, we can,
all right, maybe I should go all the way around. I don't want to trip on that weird.
yeah.
Are you able to hear us online? No voice.
Oh, it's.
We can hear you now, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, great.
Message.
I should let people know that if they're chatting, it's gonna appear on the screen, or should we minimize the chat? Some of them are direct messages,
Right, yes,
just so people know.
we'll minimize it. Yeah.
But that was the participants. That's the element. Great.
Okay, great.
Also,
Are we good?
I think so.
We're ready.
Okay.
Hi, I'm taking Eliza's spot. All right.
okay.
Okay, so, I guess, should I just launch right into the discussion questions then?
Sure.
Okay, so, I'm here to just ask some questions to, Rob and Andrew, so, I guess the first question I have is, what led each of you to your respective poetry practices?
Want me to start?
Sure.
I mean, that's a tough question in terms of just where to begin. I've been writing for a long time. But I was first kind of like most interested in writing poetry, I think, because it's like, it feels the most direct relationship you can have in writing with language. It really focuses your attention on like a smaller unit than like a narrative would say, where you're thinking on a broader scale, like the whole book. I really like the fine point you can get and think about like individual words, short sentences, how we break those up, and how they sound, how they feel, how they look on the page, and the materiality and experience of language was kind of what led me to that. And so a lot of my projects in the past have really focused on kind of the teachability of language and the space created by language, really thinking about language as the subject matter of the writing. And then this project is kind of a major shift for me to being a bit more autobiographical, not so abstract, and to be like basing it much more on my own experience. And I see that there's a relationship here. There is like the tangibility and the experience, and the life you live in language is kind of all part of this, but this is more explicitly drawing on the language of my own life. Whereas in the past, I've kind of looked at other outside sources, say like the first book was kind of on like the language of computer coding, and like an archaic code. And then my second book was looking at kind of older medical, like pre-medical texts. And so this one is really much more focused directly on my own lived experience, and kind of making that my focus in terms of where I'm drawing the language from. But I see a lot of overlap in terms of how I approach language.
Excellent, well, there's a lot to say. Like a lot. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I think my poetry practice, I've been writing poems for a while, since I was a kid. Which I sound so like boring to say, but I have. I sort of recognize poetry now at this point in my life and career as something that is really powerful, that steps outside of the individual, that every poem is sort of bringing the whole world into it. And so I don't always subscribe to this sort of like, writing was my therapy, writing saved me, because I think therapy is therapy, and I think writing is writing. But I also think, like, as a teenager who was sort of semi-aware of his slow descent into madness, poetry as a coping mechanism was what brought me to it. And I've since grown and matured and sort of come to recognize poetry as this thing much bigger outside of me and my little feelings. But me needing to have a hobby that made me feel okay when I wasn't feeling okay is what brought me there. And then I've just had really, really fabulous teachers, instructors, other poets I've worked with. My high school creative writing teacher sort of, chased me down, made me take her class. And then in college, it was the same thing. I was studying psychology and neuroscience, but writing poetry for fun, and just had some really good instructors who sort of pushed me to keep going with it. And then once I got to my MFA, the ship had sort of sailed, and I had just sort of sold my soul to poetry. But I think the thing that most sort of drew me to poetry and keeps drawing me to poetry is this sense of linguistic space as something that is really outside of normativity. Sometimes my friends might be like, oh, like you have like a degree in English. And I'm like, no, I have a degree in putting words together in the wrong order, right? Like poetry is very different from like other forms of literature. But I think that sort of break out of normativity, that push to put language together in ways that it wasn't originally intended to be put together, is what keeps me coming back to poetry. Because I can see myself reflected in it there, but more importantly, I can see aspects of the world that don't make sense reflected in poetry, because poetry at its core doesn't make sense. It is a form of really brilliant nonsense. And that's what sort of fuels my practice.
That's really, I like that. I'm sorry, just thinking about nonsense. But it's elegant, beautiful,
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying stuff that does not go together,
Like, when I say it, even like the way it looks on a page versus how you would speak it
Right,
changes, right?
totally.
So, yeah, I mean, lots to think about. So like, how did each of you come to disability studies, and how did your poetic practices intersect with disability studies? A lot.
Yeah, I came to like learning about disability studies after my master's degree. Again, like in terms of my academic focus, I came to it through an academic route generally. And so like realizing that there was kind of community and theory and ideas already around these types of experiences, and that was something I could engage with, was like a learning opportunity and something that I hadn't been exposed to previously. And that was kind of part of my own just kind of, self-directed learning and kind of making sense of myself and the world. And then when I went to do a PhD, that's when I wanted to really engage with disability theory, madness studies as well. And that's also as ways of thinking about my own experience and thinking about those relationally with others who've written and existed in these sorts of states. That came into my thinking about my own work too. And so I see kind of my academic work where I'm very explicitly engaging in madness and disability theory. And the poetic work that I do is kind of more implicitly engaging with that in terms of drawing out my own experience and putting into practice and language in a way that that feels useful, interesting, kind of exploring some of the same ideas I might otherwise do theoretically in just kind of a more, it feels weird to say playful, but almost like a flexible space, kind of, yeah.
It's okay to be playful, I think. It's
But
It doesn't often feel playful, but
but yeah, I know where you're.
yeah.
Oh, good to think about. How about you?
I think I've always sort of been obsessed with disability without really having the words for it. Because even from a young age, I was like, there is something wrong with me. I kind of kept it to myself, but I was sort of like, I'm moving through the world differently. I don't know how to express it, but I'm so sure it's happening. When I went to college, I was studying neuroscience. And I think that was sort of my first avenue of attack to try to understand disability, specifically mental disability. I was like, if we can sort of figure out what is happening on a very biological, scientific level, like in the brain, then maybe I can like figure out like what is wrong with me. I can figure out what is happening for all sorts of other people who are having similar experiences as me. And so there was some kernel of disability justice in there, but I was very cure-based. I was very medical. I was very about solving a problem. And the poem was sort of a place to radically reimagine the self, but try to then cure that self. I was sort of writing poems, trying to solve the question, why am I like this? But why am I like this in like a pejorative sense? It was not very gracious. And so I was trying to cure myself in all these poems. And then I ended up going to get my MFA at UT Austin. And just by chance, I took a Crip theory seminar with Alison Kafer, who's just a marvelous disability scholar. And it sort of blew my whole world open. I was sort of like, whoa, like this all kind of makes sense, right? And I got to grapple on the social model of disability, this idea that disabilities, instead of medical pathologies requiring cure, could instead be social characteristics that require access. And so then I was still in the poem and I was still asking, why am I like this? But it was not pejorative at all. It was sort of with a new sense of wonder, this idea like, oh, this is just a part of me like any other part of me. This is like being brown. This is like being queer. And I could explore it in the poem. And I really believe in this deep sense of poetry as a mode of knowledge creation. Audre Lorde talks about poetry being the way we give name to the nameless. And so once I sort of got over myself, was writing a lot of poems about me being disabled, I was like, poetry is much bigger than me. Let's sort of step out there. And I became really interested in poetry as a mode of creating knowledge about disability in general that we couldn't get otherwise if we weren't writing poems. There's other ways to create knowledge, but poetry is a specific one that creates very specific knowledge. And that has sort of led me into my Fulbright work after my MFA, where I'm really just trying to figure out things about disability by just writing about it over and over again. Yeah.
It's a really like interesting transition between, when you realize that, you could sort of reintegrate disability, not as a medical thing, but
Yeah.
as a part of the self that just needs care.
Yeah, it's
know?
weird. Psychiatry is kind of weird because they're telling you, they're like, okay, so there's something super wrong with you, and it's very much a part of you, right? But we are going to do our best to squash it down and make it invisible. Which, like, if you said about any other aspect of a person, that's like bananas. That makes no sense, right? But that's sort of how psychiatry operates. And so as soon as I sort of stopped thinking about the squashing down, and as soon as I started thinking much more expansively about taking up space, it was a lot easier. And that the way I take up space is creating poems, right? You can create literal space with a poem. You guys certainly can.
Yeah, and you have, both of you have, I think it's so interesting to think of poetry as a space or even a room where you're breathing and discussing and moving through things. Just really got my brain going. It's good. Can you both, in whatever order you want, speak more about the concept of not writing and your respective practices? Because I know not writing is something you both
Yeah.
Mhm.
want to talk about.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So like, as I kind of described in a bit of my introduction to this work, it really came out of thinking about how do I make the time of not writing or writing and just coming back to one singular poem, how to make that visible and how to think about that while also, not trying to fill in that gap in the same way. And so the way I kind of approached it was to just present that single poem and then reflect on it, and pull language from different sources related to that time, and as well as my own reflections and other kind of sources. And so like the idea of not writing for me, like in my work, I've actually got another piece in this collection called On Not Writing, but not writing as a singular word, thinking about this as kind of like a space of experience, a diagnosis, a stigma, a space of possibility, and kind of turning that over. And to me, I'm really indebted to the work of the American poet Anne Boyer, who has a piece, I forget the title off the top of my head, it's a piece in a book called Garments Against Women, that is kind of an essay thinking about illness and disability as a space of not being able to write, and thinking about who isn't able to write, what experiences are not able to be written about because of those experiences in and of themselves, preventing writing from happening. And so I see a lot of this project quite conversational with that, but that's kind of the basis of where my thinking comes from, just thinking about how we can make space for this kind of what might otherwise register as absence or delay or repetition, and make that visible and a subject matter in and of itself.
Oh, yeah, I mean, like, personally, I know with my own writing, like, when I have those spaces, I panic,
Yeah,
and that's kind of the place where I've always gone, but I think learning to sort of accept that as a part of the process, or even to embrace it, and to just move through it in whatever shape it happens to take. Sometimes that can be poetic in itself, so.
absolutely.
I know, I'm thinking about this as I'm listening to you folks.
I think a lot about not writing in terms of Crip time, which is this notion that instead of us sort of bending our disabled bodies to fit normative time that's often rushed or on a schedule or informed by capitalism, we sort of bend time to fit our bodies, right? And so you sort of end up like expanding the idea of what writing looks like so it can sort of fit in your own time frame. I think a lot about the notion of like a lot of the writing happens with the not writing, but if we just sort of break open what writing is, poets are we're sort of these observers, we're these little creatures who are looking around at all sorts of different things and thinking like that could be a poem, right? I was teaching a class through Workman Arts. Some of my students are here. And one of my students entered with like a full quart container of 2% milk and just sat it on the table and was drinking it. And I was so moved. I was so taken by it. I was like, there's something so poetic about that. And then like a month down the line, a milk carton eventually made it into the poem, right? But I could almost think about that whole month of metabolizing this sort of poetic idea of something I observed as the writing, even though it ultimately ends up just a few pencil strokes. I also, when I'm thinking about pushing time around, when I had dropped out of college for a bit after my psychotic break, I had so much time on my hands. So I was writing a lot of poetry, and I decided I was just gonna like write one poem a day and date it at the top of the page. And I've kept that up ever since, but there are periods where I'm not writing a ton, and then there are periods where I am writing a ton. But I just keep dating the pages one day at a time. So I'm lying, right? Every single page, I did not write it on that day. There's a very, very slim chance, right? But like to convince myself of some sort of regularity or routine, I keep dating it. And I think poetry invites that sort of non-normativeness, right? Like we're putting language together in a way it wasn't totally intended to be, but we keep doing it and now it is intended to be. So we can do the same thing with time, right? We can sort of decide days aren't passing because I'm not writing. And then today I wrote 10 pages, so 10 days pass, right? That we can do it with time. It doesn't have, we already know time is relative. So if I wrote 10 poems today, it was a long week and a half for me.
Exactly. I've gone through periods of time where I haven't written at all. And then times where I have written ridiculous amounts. But like you say, there's a percolation process.
Totally.
That happens, at least in my process. So like, yeah, like breaking up time, questioning time, moving time around.
Yeah.
I like that.
right? If you move enough time around, you're always writing. So then you don't have to worry about not writing because you are.
There you go. There you go.
I think if I can like hop in, one of the things that your comment makes me think of, Rob, is like that we're like, not writing is also always kind of in relationship to like the impulses towards like productivity and always producing more and proving yourself more. And I think especially writing is something that like you're a writer like in the act of writing, and it feels like as soon as you stop writing, then you sort of lose that connection to it. And so those periods, long periods, it can also be like there's identity tied up to it. It's like, am I a writer if I'm not writing for these periods? And like thinking through that, I think with Crip time, Mad time, thinking about the ways that like these periods of silence or quiet or repetition are part of the whole, like the process, and making space for that versus kind of like a sort of almost impossible constant production.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and I don't know if we can really hinge ourselves completely to constant production.
yeah.
We're organic creatures. I don't want to use the word creatures because creatures are used. But you know, like these biological processes aren't necessarily tied to time in a conventional way, which is kind of manufactured by people and society and whatever weird stuff is going on. So, you know, we're kind of operating on a different plane with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I also think about madness, right? And I think about like my medical diagnosis is schizoaffective bipolar, right? And that notion of bipolarity, two poles, right? There's like sort of an extreme pole and like another extreme. And I think how strange would it be to not be writing in that same sense of extremes, right? There's a total parallel between bipolar disorder and a mode of writing where you're writing a ton at once and then you're not writing a ton.
Absolutely.
I feel like it would make no sense if someone was writing so consistently about something that is so inherently about extremes and about moving between one extreme to the other.
Absolutely.
It's like the way we write is almost sort of coded into the way our bodies exist, disabled or not.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that has to be honored, I think, as much as possible, give space. And I think through disability, you know, justice and these types of filters, we can make space for this and talk openly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you folks have any other comments that you'd like to add or anything? Because I'm like my last
At
question.
this point, but do we have any
Maybe
questions?
some questions from the
I guess.
the audience?
Doing questions and answers now, or?
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left, so we could,
Perfect.
yeah, we could take questions from the Q&A if people want to write them in the Q&A. Or and in the room. Yeah.
Should we look at the,
Sure.
should we read some? I don't read this. Someone asked, I've always wondered what gives the artist courage to share such intimate feelings and experiences with diverse audiences. And yet so effortlessly make a connection. Thank you for sharing the art. Thank you. That's such a gracious question. Do you have thoughts, Andrew? I could.
The courage to share. Yeah. I don't know. I think I resisted sharing for a long time that, and I resisted talking about myself, and like putting myself explicitly into the work. I feel like through engaging with MAD studies and disability studies, I've kind of seen that more like the importance of that and also the value to myself in creating the type of work that is, you know, explicitly locating me in my own experience and in relation to the work. It's just kind of a slow process that I came to kind of a realization that my own experience isn't something to be pushed aside so I could write, but it could be, you know, the subject matter and my relationship to the writing. So yeah, I don't, it took a long time, I'll say, to get to this place. So this newest project is really, it feels like kind of the start of that in a lot of ways. And so it's in the process and exploring it.
Yeah, I would say for me, I sort of have two answers. One is I believe so strongly in poetry and its capacity for knowledge, its capacity to create feeling, to, you know, inspire meaningful change in other people, that really overpowers any sort of hesitation or self-consciousness that I might have, because I understand that I'm doing something important that is beyond me, which is letting people experience poetry, whether it's by me or not. So that really pushes me to share a lot. The other answer is I'm an oversharer. I overshare a lot. I'm very open. All my friends and family who are in this chat know that. They're probably listening to the first answer, like, this isn't it. Rob's just gonna say anything about anything. And I will. So I'm just an oversharer. So that's what it is for me. Yeah.
Worth doing. It's
Yeah,
fun.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna say anything.
that's what
Whatever.
poetry is for.
Yeah, you can't have too much shame. Yeah.
Is there other questions in the room? Sorry, just for access. Someone could repeat the question
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
for
sure.
the hour.
Hi, Sandra. I was gonna ask, one thing that I think really distinguishes poetry is its attention to form. And I notice a lot, especially, you know, with the cart poem and side by side, like playing with form as a way to think about access or to delve into repetition and numbers in the sort of couplets of your work. So maybe you could just talk about form as a way to think about normativity and non-normativity of it, and how that impacts the work.
Yes, so the question for folks to hear is about form and poetry, attention to form, particularly attention to form as it relates to access and creating space. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think about form a lot in my work. And I always want the form that the project is taking to really reflect what the subject matter is in an intentional way. So for this project, it's really like it found the form of these couplets, and I wanted to keep them for the coda essay in groups of 8, replicating you know, the number that my head goes to check things repetitively, and to kind of like make that form of checking in on language and that repetition, which is you know, in some sense coming back to the same place with some changes over time, and thinking about the relationship between time and space as the poem moves. And that was the way to I felt like I wanted to register that in terms of in the form of this piece. But yeah, I think in terms of, yeah, maybe I'll just end there. I'm losing track of my thoughts, but
No, I love that. I think for me, I think about form a lot, and I think about it sort of on a figurative level and an emotional level. So on a figurative level, how can I make my form somehow represent the content of my poem? So, you know, a poem about a relationship with another person. There's 2 people. So using something like couplets is a good choice because it emphasizes that two-ness. Or the curation poem. There was a sense of things being scattered across the room and the content of the poem. So I wanted the poem to scatter across the page too. But I also think about form on emotional level. And so if I know the poem itself is dealing with really delicate feelings, I want to find a form that also feels delicate. And that's just sort of about following emotion. That's, you know, sort of just gets into the artistic side of it, where you just sort of have to trust your gut as an artist and think, how can I make these words physically look as delicate on the page as I can so that they support the delicateness of what they're actually saying. So that's sort of how I tend to think about it.
Yeah, probably time for one more question, please go ahead.
It's sort of more of a comment that I hope you can comment on. And I'm an oversharer too, by the way. My name's Naomi and I study with Rob, which is wonderful, and Layla. And anyway, I feel that there's definitely a philosophical content to poetry. And I studied philosophy of art and literature, and basically we were trying to define what art is, and maybe a simple way of describing it is that art imitates life. I feel that that's art. Art is also poetry. It's all these other different forms of expression. And I'm wondering what you think about the philosophical content of poetry.
Fabulous. In case folks couldn't hear that, the question is just about the philosophical content of poetry, the way poetry interacts with philosophy. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of thoughts, thank you. Yeah, I'm just thinking of where to go with that. I think, you know, philosophically, like, in terms of like what you were saying about like defining what art is, I think like, you know, part of the process of writing or engaging in the arts and for me, poetry is also, you know, consistently going back to the question of what poetry is and what it could be and what we want it to be. I tend to like the description of poetry as the poet William Carlos Williams gave, that it's a little machine made out of words. And I like that, not as kind of a trivializing statement, but that you put these elements together and see how they work and see what relationships they have and like interactions they have in the world. And I like thinking of the poem as this space of trying out different languages and language itself and experience, and how this all comes together in these words on the page, and how the interactions and the movements of those relate to each other and have kind of repercussions and resonances that might not have even been originally intended. But yeah, I think every time you sit down to write a new poem, you're re-articulating what you think poetry is too.
I guess I'm trying to link it to the spiritual.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you
yeah.
very much.
I'll answer briefly because I know we're at time. I think with poetry and philosophy, I think about that quote I can't attribute right now. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And poetry is a really wonderful vessel of taking the mundane and taking the experiential and being able to extrapolate out into things we might consider more philosophical, like theories. So yeah, this sort of gorgeous elevation of the quotidian can really happen in poetry, which gives us a much broader look on life. That's all I've got.
Thank you so much to Rob, Andrew, Max for facilitating. It was a really lovely discussion. And thank you to the ASL interpreters and NT, our live captioner. Thank you to our wonderful team here at DFT. Thank you to Tally and Dwayne. Thank you to Darren and Paris and Kelly and Jenna and Esther for all of your support of this event. And thanks again to the School of Disability Studies and the Faculty of Community Services for sponsoring the event. And thank you so much to all of you for your chats and your comments and your Q&As. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everything. And thanks to all of you for coming out to the event. Okay. I think that's it. Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Eliza.
Thank you, Eliza.